Welcome to Wire Guild. The tutorial that I'm going to show you today is a tapered bead bangle. It's sort of an asymmetrical shape and the beads taper down from large beads on one side, as you can see, all the way down into a narrow side. I do like asymmetrical and it's really nice, it looks good on the wrist. So you're going to need 7 pieces of 21 gauge square wire. I've used dead soft. That is because we need to do the manipulation to make that opening in the middle of the bracelet. 18 gauge half hard half round wire for our binding. Some 1mm or 18 gauge round wire to make the clasps. The graduated beads. I've used a 10mm and 8, 2 6s, 2 4s and 2 3s. Now it's up to you what you put in, and you don't have to use silver beads like I've done. You could use whatever beads that you've got handy lying around that happen to be graduated. So I've got my, let me just check, I've got 7 here. 1 2 3 4 5 6 7, yes, yeah, I've got 7 pieces of wire, so I'm just going to put those on one side, and what we'll do is we will talk about the length and what you're going to need for your sizing in a minute. I've got some 18 gauge half round wire, and this I'm going to use for my binding. These are my 2 lengths of 1mm or 18 gauge wire. One's 2.5 inches and one's 2 inches. And then I've got my silver beads. I just hope that they don't all escape. They are trying to. Right then. Now I've got a really cute little thing here. It's a vernier gauge. And it's really good if like me you don't always put your beads exactly where they go or should go. You can pop this over the top of the bead and it'll tell you exactly how big the bead is. So that's a 10mm bead. And just show you on one of the others. So that one is, oops, there we go, the lines that it fell out, but it's an 8mm is that one. And then if I drop down to that one, you can see that that's a smaller bead. But it's really handy, especially if you tend to throw a lot of beads into one big box and you're not sure exactly what size they are. It's kind of a cool thing to have. They're not expensive, you can get them on the internet. So sizing. I intend my bracelet to measure 7.5 inches when I've finished. Now normally that would need lengths of 7 inches of 21 gauge wire, but because we're opening up a shape in the middle, an aperture, I will lose some of the length of wire due to that. So usually I would, if I was making a 7.5 inch bracelet, I'd have 7 inch. In this case I'm going to have 7.5, even though I'm making a 7.5 inch bracelet. So what I've done is I've just drawn out what I need. I need 2.5 inches at one length, 2 inches in the middle and 2.5 at the other. Now if you don't know what you're going to need, you can use either a ruler or your little vernier gauge to measure your beads. Now I have got here a 10mm, an 8mm, 2 6mm and 2 4mm. Now you might have noticed on the instructions that I used an extra couple of those, but I'll show you those in a minute. So I've got my wires, they're 7.5 inches. My plan that's drawn out on my paper is for 7 inches. That's just going to leave one end longer. I'll show you why in a minute. It will all become clear, honestly. I'm not trying to confuse you just for the fun of it. Now then, I'm just going to use my plastic jawed pliers just to get these nice and straight and smooth. You can of course use a low tack tape to hold these together for you if you can't just manage doing it with your fingers. I never really think about it because I don't know whether my fingers are that practiced at doing it now that they just, you know. So I'm going to go 2.5 inches from the end and I'm going to put a binder on. Rather a lot of wire here, probably going to get in the way. So think about your sizing. I've got 2 inch for my middle opening and then I've got 2.5 inches at either end. That gives me a total amount of 7 inch. Right, I've just popped a corner in my binding wire. It really is quite awkward with all this. I should have just cut a little piece off. Let me just get that around there. Always remember when you're binding, go round with your wire and then press down with your pliers. We're aiming for a lovely flat piece here. We don't want it to look like multiple different wires. We want it to look like a nice, super smooth flat. So press down and wrap round again. And press down again. I'll probably go around, I'm just going to lift, pull. That just makes sure that first wrap that I did is nice and tight, and now I'm going to go around from the other side. Now I always support my wires. I'm either supporting them with my fingers on my left hand or the pliers across with my right hand. So there's always something there holding those wires flat while I'm binding. I'm just going to trim off the wire. That's it. Move this out of the way and press that down nice and flat. Make sure that's nice and tight and down. You don't want any little bits sticking up when it comes to somebody wearing it. And I'm just going to trim the other side. These snips are getting a little bit blunt. Press them down. It's probably time for a new pair. Press that down. So I've got my binding on, and I now need a 2-inch opening in the middle, 2.5 to their binding, and then 2 inches for the opening. So make sure it's smooth, make sure it's straight. But the binding I'm going to put on this time is not going to be like a permanent one. I'm going to take it off again in a minute. So I'm just going to wrap around. You could use a piece of scrap wire for this. You could probably use your sticky tape if you're using sticky tape, as long as it was, you know, reasonably firm. I'm just using a little bit of half round wire that I had over. Now let's make sure this is all straight and flat. So my temporary binding is at the end where it is the spare wire is, the extra length. And you'll see why that is in a moment. I need to get my fingernails in here, and I'm going to take 3, I've got flat ended pliers, and I'm going to take 3 of the, I am if I don't keep dropping it, 3 of the wires. So flat ended pliers, 3 wires. Slip your pliers in and work them up as near as you can get to that proper binding that we put on. And I am easing the wire out, supporting with my left hand, easing with the pliers with my right, so that I'm bringing it out. Can you see how I'm still supporting with my left? Hold it tight there, and then you can ease the wire out. Make sure it's straight and flat. Having your wires crossing or bunched, I just need to straighten that up. I just sort of kinked it when I went in. Let me just even that up. That's better. Now I'm going to take 3 wires out on the other side, so I'm leaving a single wire down the middle. This is why we used an odd number, why we used 7, and I'm just working the other side out exactly the same as I did on the first side. There we go. Make sure it's flat. If it's not flat and your wires are crossed, it will not give the same effect. You want this really lovely sort of smooth, sleek finish. So now I'm going to take this temporary binding off. We'll move that to one side. And now I can thread the beads on. See, I couldn't have threaded the beads on before I took the binding off. And if you try and put the beads on before you do the shaping, well, it just doesn't work. So there goes my 10mm. Fits in lovely in there, and an 8 and a 6. Go on you go. And another 6. And a couple of 4s, and I'll see what that looks like. You can play around with these, you know, deciding different colours, different sizes, how fast you want them to drop down, you know, in graduated sizes. Now let me have a look. Now this is just smooth all the wires out. You see I've got a little gap from where I was bound, so I'm just going to put 2 teenies on. These are, I can't remember, to tell you the truth, whether these are 3mm or whether these are 2.5s. Now really I ought to put them in my little vernier and have a look, and I could tell you exactly, but they're only just the little dinky beads, so I'm just going to add those to the wire there, just to finish that long triangle off. Where's the other one gone? Come here. I'll just pop that on. Now obviously the larger the bracelet you're making, the more beads you can put on. The smaller the bracelet, the fewer beads you can put on, because it's got to balance with the wrist. So if you've got a lady with a really, really tiny wrist and you're only making, say, a 5.5 inch bracelet, you can't get all these beads on because they're going to go all the way around. It's going to look silly. Right, so I'm just evening up with my pliers. Okay. Now you see, I've done these for blokes. It's quite a popular one with men, especially in copper. And copper with black beads looks absolutely wonderful. Let's just wrap this round. And I'll often use more beads because of course you're making a much larger a bracelet. I mean, a man's bracelet, you can be doing anything up to sort of a 10-inch bracelet. Let's just press that down and wrap around. I am working from the left towards the beads. This will make sure that I've got it nice and tight when I'm pulling in. Okay, let me just lift, pull. That just sorts out any looseness that might have been on the first wrap. And I'm going to wrap that round. So I'm only going around 4 times, just like I did on the other side. And that will be sufficient to hold it. Press that down. Now my beads are sort of a bit blobby and they're not really straight, and I also want them more towards the top of the piece rather than the bottom, so I'm just going to wriggle, make sure my edges are flat using my pliers. Lovely. Make sure it's all the way down. There we go. Sometimes the more simple the design, I don't know if that's good English or not, but the simplicity of the design means you have to be even more careful with the finish. You get a really ornate design, it doesn't matter if 1 or 2 things are a little bit lumpy and bumpy because you can't really see. Let me just measure this off. Now I need this to be 7 inches long, so as you can see I've got a little bit overhanging, but I've just got it on one side because I kept it on the side that we were working towards. So I'm going to trim all those off, and the easiest way to do it is go over where your snips, press, and you'll get like a little score line going across the wires. Then I can take my pliers in and just nip those off one at a time as I go through them. I was saying that if you have a really simple design, there is no way to hide anything. Therefore you've got to make sure that the finish is better, it's sleeker, it's smoother, because you don't want to detract from the simplicity of the design. So now I'm going to bind the ends, and I'll probably put more bindings on the end than I put either side of the beads. It's probably 6 or 8. I like a few more at the ends on this design, it looks good. You could bind halfway down if you wanted, you know, you could put a binder there in the middle as well as doing one at the end. It's not really necessary for strength, but it looks good. It's nice having the wires running one way and then the bindings running the other. It looks nice. And if you're doing, like say, a man's bracelet that's that much bigger, it's a good idea to have one in the middle, because obviously you've got a longer length of wire. So I've wrapped around and around, and I am leaving some of the wire sticking out of the end. I'm not going to wrap all the way up to the very, very tips of the wire, because we're going to use these wires that are sticking out to attach our clasp. Just press that bit down and trim that piece off. All these little bits that get trimmed off, when I'm using silver, that's not quite straight. Can you see how it's off a bit? So I'm just going to go over it with my pliers again and just trim that down. Little tiny bits, but just make it straight. All the little bits that come off, that I trim off, go into a scrap pot, and that is returned to the company where I buy the silver. Let me show you how much I've got here. It's about 1/4 of an inch. It's definitely not less than 1/4 of an inch, which is probably about 5mm, half a centimetre. If you get much more than that, it makes the hooks on the end unwieldy and hard to handle. If you get less than that, you don't have enough wire to make a hook. So I'm just going to put the binding on the other side now to make it match up. Press that down, wrap it round, and just keep doing that. You can use square wire to bind if you need to, if you haven't got any half round, but it's so much harder to use, it's so much harder to keep it neat and straight, whereas the half round, the flat side goes against the inside of the work. Just trim those down, they're a little lumpy and bumpy, so we just trim those off so that they're perfectly straight. The half round is so much neater. You put the flat side against the wire, and the domed side then produces a lovely sort of soft little blobby effect over the top, and it's really nice and much easier to use. So if you can get hold of the half round, I definitely recommend it. It gives a neater finish. Thank you. But if you're just practicing, you know, go ahead, use whatever you've got handy. I always say there's no rights and wrongs in this, there's just new designs. So now I'm going to take my 2 small pieces of wire. One of these is 2 inch and one of these is 2.5. Sorry, I haven't got a ruler with me at the moment, so I'm not sure what that is in centimetres, but I'm sure if you've got one you can just flip it over and check. So I'm going to take the shorter of the 2 pieces, that is my 2-inch piece, and round nose pliers, bending the wire, gripping it in the middle, and then bending it around the jaws of the pliers so that the wires sort of meet up. Let's just show you that there. So it's like a U shape. And then I'm going to take the top edge and roll it away from me, and I'm gripping the very, very, very tip of it, and I want this loop that I'm making to be large enough so that I can get my wires in that are going to hold it onto the bracelet. So don't make this super tiny, because you'll just need to make it a bit bigger. So roll those round till they touch, put my pliers in either side like that, and then just bring them together. Ta-da! A little tiny loop, or an eye for a hook and eye. Now this is my longer piece. If you want, you could mark it in the middle so that you've got the middle spot. I've got that used to doing it, that I do it just by eye nowadays. I've bent it in half and I'm just closing it up. There we go. So it's just bent in double. Grip with my round nose pliers and make that into a little hook. I need flat pliers again now. They go over the top of the hook, but it's still slightly poking out. Can you just see there? I'm just going to trim that top piece. It really is just a tiny bit. And we'll just bend one way and one the other. When you take this out of your pliers, it looks a little bit like a coat hanger, you know, that you put in your wardrobe. And then I'm going to roll these in and underneath. There's one side. Let's do the other. Now if they start crossing, can you see how there isn't really enough room and it's going to cross? Just keep going, even though they're crossed over each other. Put the hook back in your pliers, put your round nose in either hole, and then just ease them out so that they sit neatly side by side. And that is our little hook for our hook and eye clasp. I'm going to split the wires on the end. Now I have 7, so I can't split them evenly, so one side will have 3 like that, and the other side will have 4. Don't start messing about with the middle wire trying to make it into a curl or stuff like that. It's, honestly, nobody's going to notice that one side's got 3 and one side's got 4. And then I just make those even. It's only a little V that I put in there. I aren't bending these down flat or anything like that. It's just a small V. And I will do the same with the other side, but this time the side that had 3 will have 4 and the side that had 4 will have 3. Doesn't really make a lot of difference. It doesn't matter if you don't do it. Just for some reason my mind decides that to make life even, it ought to go that way. Pliers over the top and bend these wires upwards to the top of the piece, and then grip with your round nose pliers and curl them into a little tiny hook. Do not close the hook because we need to get the hook or the eye, whichever we're doing in. So pliers over the top, bend upwards towards the top of the piece, grip the end of the wire and tuck that back underneath to form a little hook, and the same on the other side. There we go. You might notice I always do one away from me and one towards me. Don't know why, always do. So let's just put our hook and eye on, hang that over the little hooks we made, snipe nose pliers so they've got a pointy end. The reason is I go in and then ease over, ease over, ease. The plier is supporting the back of the circle as I make that little hook close up. And the same on the other side. Ease it down, ease it, ease it. This then, because those will curl in, there will be no sharp edges there to touch your wrist at all. Give them a wriggle. Lovely. And just pop on the other side. Now, I don't know whether any of you go along to the forum and have a look, but there is a bracelet shown on the forum which has a slightly different clasp. It's made basically in the same way, but it's been done with a triangular shape, and actually it would be ideal for this bracelet. It would look really nice because you would follow that angular design all the way through. So if you have a look on the forum for the pictures, it was a post that was by Maggie Wired. So if you type that into the search bar, it'll bring it up and you'll be able to see that clasp she made. It really is very pretty. Now let's get this shaped up. So I've just got a little bottle here. Don't mess about using posh things. Bottles, beakers, cups, jam jars, whatever you've got handy will make a nice shape. Now this needs to be a little bit smaller just to go around the sides of the wrist. So I've got a reel here of fine silver wire and I'll just use it because most people's wrists are not circular, they're oval. So what I've done is I've given myself a soft curve over the top, tighter curves on either side to make an oval, and just adjust it with my fingers. And that is our finished bracelet. I'm sure you'll have great fun with yours because you'll be able to use so many different beads and different ideas. It's one of those that's really nice to wear, and if you're doing shows and selling, this has always been a brilliant seller. People really like this. It's the sort of thing they can wear every day, and you know, that's always good for selling. So there we are, cleaned it up, gave it a polish, took some nice pictures of it. I hope you enjoyed that one. Thank you very much for watching. Happy wrapping.